So anyway, before we get to this week's topic, a quick review of what we talked about before Purim. We talked about Esther, and we talked about how Esther is all of us, and she represents our eternal mission as partners with God to act in the image of God. And so we talked about the idea that Mordecai challenges her to find her inner Esther, to find what it is that she is put in this world to do. And she, in fact, finds it. And she says that she instructs the sages to write her story. And why does she say that the sages should write her story? Because the trajectory of her growth and of her finding herself is really the story of each of us. So that's just an important message to remind ourselves of our responsibility to find our place in this world and to step up and do what we are, destined, so to speak, to do. The other idea that we talked about with respect to Esther is that we use Esther, the text of Esther, as a means to which to understand what it is, why it is that Tanakh is so important, and why it is that certain stories were included in Tanakh. And we said that every story that is included in Tanakh is what is called a nivuah shehutzecha lidorot, a story that is eternally relevant. And we talked about the idea that there were 1,200,000 prophets that existed throughout history, and which ones were included, those whose messages were relevant to all times. And what we did was we took the book of Esther and we kind of looked at how through the ages people adapted the book to serve the purposes of their times. And it's such a beautiful idea to think about that our ancestors and our descendants will be reading the same book and finding meaning in it, but that meaning, right, might evolve and change depending on the exigencies of the time. And I think that that just speaks to the idea that God is the ultimate author, right, with the ability to write in a way that is meaningful to every person who reads his text. So that's just by means of a review, but it's an important review because it helps us also understand what it is that we're going to be talking about today. So we are going to be using the story of Rachav in order to understand what, in fact, is the purpose of Tanakh. Not the 5 books of Moses, but everything that comes after. So before I begin, before I continue, actually, I want to know if I were to ask you, what is the purpose of Tanakh, right? So what is Tanakh? Tanakh is, right, the Pentateuch, and the scripture, the prophets and the scriptures. So what is the purpose, would you say, of Tanakh? Why do we have this? Why are we supposed to be learning and reading this book?
It's a banana on the floor.
Sorry?
It's a banana on the floor.
Say it again, please. Thank you.
What is this?
Yes. What is the purpose of Tanakh? Why was it written? Yeah, Noreen?
Well, to show you how to live and what your relationship of God, what the relationship of God is to the Jewish people and to the individual.
Awesome. So you say it's to teach us how to live, right? And it's a guidebook, right? It's a guidebook for us as individuals. It's beautiful, and a guidebook, bespeaking our relationship with God.
And in community too.
Excellent. The 3 big ones, right? Individual, God, community. That's what we're all about. Any other ideas? What is the purpose of Tanakh? Why was it written? Any other? Okay. Yeah, Rose?
It's a history book.
It's a guidebook of lessons of imperfect people. And Um, it's one thing for someone to say, well, just believe in God. And if you have the history or you see where God's been in our lives, I think you have a better, a stronger link.
Mm-hmm.
God's been there for us. God has saved us. We've been imperfect people. It sort of has, it's a really good footnote to that, believe in God. And the footnote is the Tanakh that shows where God has been in our lives and saved the Jewish people. And we can look it up for ourselves instead of just someone preaching it to us.
Awesome. So, okay. So basically what you're doing, it's great because you're taking Noreen, like you're going deeper into what Noreen said, right? So Noreen said it's all about our relationship. And what Rose is doing is saying that what does Tanakh do? It describes our relationship. And she also said a very important word, right? Our imperfect relationship with God. And
well, we're not perfect. And he's
Yeah.
punished and he's rewarded, and it's a lesson. It's but we look at all the forefathers, they were very imperfect and they had imperfect children, and they made mistakes and paid for it and were redeemed and asked for forgiveness, and it's not in a vacuum.
Awesome. So I think it's very important to, God created a perfect world imperfectly. I think that's what Rabbi Gober, or God created an imperfect world perfectly, right? And that is kind of what Tanakh is about. So excellent. So what I want to do now is we're going to talk about this through the story of Rachav. We are going to explore what it is, what the purpose of Tanakh is, and also we're gonna go to Rose's point and explore this idea of imperfection in Tanakh and the role that it's there to play. It's funny though, I love Tanakh, and that's my job, is to teach Tanakh. And sometimes when I teach Tanakh to middle school and high schoolers, I wish that the stories were just a little bit nicer. Because sometimes, I think like, are the kids thinking to themselves, and this is the Jewish people, right? So it is interesting sometimes as we read Tanakh, and we're going to touch on an interesting story towards the end of our class. You really wonder, like, wow, these are my ancestors. So that's something that we are going to be working on and exploring today. By show of hands or blinking of the screen, how many of you know the story of Rachav? Rahab. Okay. So it's interesting. Rachav is actually, so she is we're gonna meet her in a second, but Rachav is a harlot, a zonah, and we meet her in the second of chapter of Joshua. And basically, what is her role? Her role is Joshua sends out spies just before the conquest of Israel. They're still standing on the other edge of the Jordan River. And he sends out 2 spies to kind of check out the lay of the land. The first place they go is Jericho, to Jericho, which is the first city that they are going to conquer. And it's there that they end up in the house of Rachav. Rachav saves them. And we'll read the story fuller in the text. But I think what I want to think about before we even start learning is this really odd idea that here we are in the second chapter of Tanakh, basically the first story that appears right after the Moshe's death and the conclusion of the 5 books of the Torah. And what's the first story that appears? We have the story of a zonah. I like the word zonah better than harlot, so we're going to go with zonah. We have the story of a zonah who is a heroine of the first chapter that kind of sets the stage for all of Tanakh. So what I want to do with you today is explore why it is, right? And who is this Rachav the Zonah who merits to begin all our stories of Tanakh. So first, what I want to do with you is we're going to learn some midrashim. And what I love so much about midrashim is midrashim help to give us a lens through which we can understand what the sages wanted us to learn about that character. And I've said in almost every class, midrashim, are they true? Factually true? Maybe or maybe not. Are they true in like the true with a capital T? Absolutely, in the sense that they're here to teach us truths about the world that we live in and the world that God wants us to live in, as Noreen said. So let's go to our first page of our sources. And we've got here, first, it's interesting. I love to bring art in. And this guy, James Tissot, loved to draw stories in Tanakh. So I just wanted to look at his picture for a second. Here's Rachav, doing her job. And now here we go to the first source. So we're going to start with 4 midrashim. One we're going to explain now, and then the others we're going to get to, we're going to look at now, and I want you to put them in your pocket, and we will talk about them as we go through the text. So the first midrash that at the top of the page, just to set the stage, said that there were 4 women of extraordinary beauty in the world: Sarah, Abigail, Rachav, and Esther. So does everyone know who all of these women are? And everyone know who Sarah, Rachav, Abigail, and Esther are? Okay, so just
I don't know who Abigail is.
So Abigail is kind of the one that is a little less familiar. So Abigail actually was David's second wife. And she meets David because her husband decides not to help David. And David is about to destroy her. David's running away from Saul. He needs food and sustenance for his soldiers. He goes to this man named Naval, who is the husband of Abigail, and he says, "Please help me. I've been watching your sheep and taking care of your stuff. Please help sustain me." And Naval says, "Absolutely not." And so David is going to kill him, and then the beautiful Abigail stops him from killing her husband. Subsequently and conveniently, Naval dies, and David marries Abigail. And what is unique about Abigail is she is one of the, if not the only woman who is listed in Tanakh as being both beautiful and wise. So not only, there are a lot of women that are listed as being beautiful, but there's only one that is beautiful and wise. So now we have these four characters: Sarah, Abigail, Rachav, and Esther, and they are the most beautiful woman in the world. The question is, why are they linked together? What is something that is in common with all 4 of them? So anyone have any ideas from what you know about their beauty and how they use their beauty? You could think even with respect to just Esther. So I'll give you a hint.
Did they all in some way do something that saves the future of the Jewish people?
Excellent. Using what? Using what?
Well, using their smarts, but also their beauty for that reason.
Awesome. So right here we have 4 women, right, who because of their beauty are placed in certain situations, right? Sarah was kidnapped by Paro, right? Abigail, right, and her relationship with David. Esther, we all know, right, and her relationship with Hashverosh. And Rachav, they say Rachav was so beautiful that that's in the Midrash also, that every man that looked at her lusted after her. So here we have 4 women placed in precarious situations because of their beauty, and who use their external beauty, right, to convey an internal strength, which, like Suzanne says, save the Jewish people, or, you know, right, save and move forward the Jewish people. So that's what I just wanted to just use this midrash as a way to kind of think about what midrashim are doing and how to kind of like tease out their messages. Okay, so now we have Rachav the Zonah, which is really important. She is put in the same category as Sarah, right, Abigail, and Esther. So we're already taking this Rachav and we're putting her right way up there in terms of important Jewish women. Okay, now let's see what else the Midrashim have to say about Rachav. I'm sharing my screen again. So it says that Rachav married Yehoshua. Okay, amazing, right? The Zonah, the harlot, right? What does she do right after the fall of Jericho? She marries the leader of the Jewish people. That's a quick turnaround, right? And also that's a really like big thing, right? How could it be that Yoshua, right, marries this woman, and why, right? Why would the sages want to link her and him? That we're going to put in our pocket. Another question, another midrash. There were 8 Kohanim and prophets that descended from Rachav, and who are they? None other than Yirmiyahu, Jeremiah, who we all know, and then these other prophets, Hilkiah, Serachiah, Mahseiah, Baruch, Neriah, Hanamel, and Shalom, right? So interesting, this Zonah, right, also merits for some reason, right, to be the ancestress of 8 prophets, included in which is the very famous prophet Jeremiah, right? So now we have to think again, why, right? Why do the sages want us to link Rachav and Jeremiah? Interestingly, also, Rachav and Jeremiah are almost bookends of the prophets, right? Rachav is at the very beginning of our conquest of the land, right? And Jeremiah lives at the time of the destruction. So also
Just a quick question.
Yeah, sure.
Is it being a prophet was necessarily an inherited thing? Like, you know, your father was a prophet, your grandfather was a prophet?
Oh, actually 100% like not. And there's actually it in Shmuel, like there's a little conversation that goes on like that, like with Shaul. Shaul becomes a prophet, and someone says, wait, you know, but his father wasn't a prophet. And then the people around him say, yeah, but that's not what gets you to be a prophet. No. So what gets you to be a prophet is some holiness within yourself, like something that you work on. That's you know, in order to merit to be a prophet. It's an earned title. But what's interesting though, still, like what the sages want to say is somehow there's something within Rachav's character, right, that funnels through, right, to Jeremiah to make him worthy of becoming a prophet. So that's what we want to do, Rose, is try to make that connection. You know what I'm saying? You get what I'm. So, and one last thing, there is a woman prophet who lived at the same time as Jeremiah, and she also is attributed to Rachav. Her name is Huldah. And why is she connected to Rachav? Because we're going to see a word that is associated with Rachav, the word tikva, which we know as hope, but is used in Rachav to represent a cord. And it says that Huldah, her grandfather was someone named Tikva. And so because of that word Tikva, people associate her, right, as being a descendant of Rachav. So with her, what's interesting is I want to remember the word Tikva, and Tikva as being something that's a connecting word between her and Rachav. Okay, so you get it? So let's just summarize what we have. We have a midrash that puts Rachav on a pedestal, right, with other beautiful women who use their beauty to find eternal strength. And then we have these interesting midrashim that we're going to have to explore right, that say the number one, Rachav, the Zonah, married Yehoshua. Number two, Rachav's descendants were none other than the prophet of Jeremiah and a bunch of other less known but important prophets. Number three, that Midrash associates Rachav with this word tikva, which we know as hope, but she will be used in her context terms of cord. Use the word cord. Finally, we are going to put all these midrashim together. It's a tall order, and we're going to say, do these midrashim help us to understand why it is that the story of Rachav appears in the second chapter of all the books of Tanakh and really is used there as the foundational story so as to give us a lens through which to understand Tanakh and its purpose. Everyone's with me? Okay, so now we're good? Okay, so now what we're going to do, any questions, Noreen? Yeah.
How can she have descendants that are Kohanim when she's not a Kohen and neither is Joshua? That doesn't make sense.
So what the way it would be is that one of her descendants, right, was a woman, right, who married a Kohen. It's a great question, right? So that's what it's saying.
The only one that Sarai?
No. So what happens is it's none of between her and those 8 prophets. There's lots and lots of generations.
Oh, I see.
So somewhere in those generations is a woman who marries a Kohen.
Oh,
right.
Okay.
But it's important. So going to your point, though, it's important to see what Rachav, right, is both the mother of priests and prophets, right? That just puts her up again on a great pedestal. So now let's look at our story. We're going to chapter 2 of the book of Joshua, and we're on page number 3. Okay, and I just want to show you how really our first story is really the story of Rachav, because what is chapter all about? Chapter 1 of Joshua is basically a pump-up speech to Joshua and to the Jewish people. You know, Moses has just died, and Yoshua, you can imagine, is a bit overwhelmed. You know, it's like, tag, you're it, right? Go conquer the lands of Israel. And the Jewish people are like, OMG, you know, we don't have our leader anymore. Can we do this? So what Hashem does in chapter 1 of Joshua is says, just like I was with Moshe, I will be with you, right? The only thing that you got to do is you got to follow the Torah, like, which is what, you know, we were talking about at the beginning, right? That Tanakh provides us a guidepost of how it is that we're supposed to act. And when God rewards and punishes us is if we follow what it is that he wants us to follow. So this is chapter 1. He says, right, be strong and of good courage, right? For you, right? Chazak ve'ematz, right? Be strong and of good courage because you got this, Yoshua, you're going to be able to do this. And so that's chapter 1. And what is chapter 2? First action of Joshua as a leader is he sends spies to check out the lands. Interestingly, he doesn't send 12 spies, he sends 2. And as opposed to, that's a whole other course, like a whole other class, like comparing this story to the story of the 12 spies. But here he surreptitiously sends out 2 spies. The nation of Israel doesn't know what is happening. My question for you as we read the story is to think about, are these guys good spies? So, I'm laughing because you can imagine they really, if we really look at the text with fresh eyes, right, we're going to see they're not such great spies. So then the question is, what is the purpose of their mission? So here we go. So Yoshua, the son of Nun, right? Yoshua ben Nun sends out of Shittim, which is on the other side of the Jordan River. He sends out 2 spies and he says, go check out the land, go check out Jericho. And where do they end up, right? What's the first place where do they go? They come to the house of a harlot, right? Of a Zonah. Before we meet Rachav, right? We meet the fact that she is a prostitute. And that is who people know her as. Her name comes afterwards, right? The first introduction is they come to the house of the harlot, and by the way, her name is Rachav. Okay, so first two psukim, right? Why they end up in a whorehouse, right? That's a question that, if you don't know the rest of the story, right, you're wondering, like, why is it, right, that they show up there first? Why aren't they hanging out and hiding in the corners of the marketplace trying to figure out what's going on? So they go there, and within the third pasuk, what happens? And it was told to the king of Jericho, behold, there came men tonight of the children of Israel to search out the land. Are they good spies, guys? Doesn't seem like it. It's funny, like the Midrash tells us that who are they? They're like Caleb and Pinchas, right? That's not their job, right? Well, Caleb once was a spy, but so right away they get discovered, and not only are they discovered, but the mission is known, right? What are they doing, right? These people have come to search out the land, right? And the king, and not only are they discovered, but the king knows exactly where they are. What does he do? He sends spies to Rachav. He sends messengers to Rachav and says, hand me the men, right? They're in your house. I know that, right? So what's going on here? Why do they go to Rachav's house, right? And they don't seem to be, really good spies, right? So what is this story about? Let's keep on going a little bit, and then we'll talk. We'll step out for a second, right? So what does Rachav do? The woman takes the two men, she hides them, and then she goes and she tells the messengers of the king, they're not here anymore. They left, right? And she talks a lot. And a sign of, in the Tanakh, whenever people talk a lot, which is also like a sign in general, right? When people talk a lot, right? It's because maybe they're a little nervous, right? Or maybe they're trying to distract you. And so she's talking because she wants to make sure those two guys are hidden well, right? And then she sends the messengers of the king off on a hot pursuit of no one, right? And then we're going to go meet her. She's going to go back up to the roof and have a conversation with these two men. So what's going on here, right? So why would they go straight to the house of a zonah? Anyone have any thoughts on why would they go straight to the house of a zonah?
They're taking a break.
Right. The truth is, if you read it, Suzanne, actually, if you look at the words, there is right away, it says, and they laid there, So is it possible that they were taking a break, as you said, right? But then why is this, we gotta give the Tanakh more, credence than that. There's gotta be something deeper here. Yeah, Noreen?
Well, I think that's probably where all the men went. Of the town, and they were likely to hook up and be able to meet those kind of people. But she was like an innkeeper? Maybe I learned this story when I was younger, and that's what they told me in Hebrew school. They didn't say it was a house of ill repute, but that was a place where you could land when you came to a place.
Awesome.
There was a community there that went there.
Awesome. So the truth is, right, this is the stories we skipped in school. So there is one, right, she's called a zonah, right? What does the word zonah sound like? Birkat hamazon, right, food, right? So there is, we want a whole line of thinking that says, okay, we want to say that she was an innkeeper. But we also know that innkeepers also sometimes have a backdrop, right? Or as being, there might be something behind, the closed doors. And so that the sages say that it's possible she was an innkeeper, but there was also potentially, right, something else that she was engaged in.
But a lot of people came to her abode.
Awesome. So which, and I'll get to in a second, Geraldine, which the fact that a lot of people came there also could have, number one, been kind of like a disguise for them, right? that they were just like everybody else who passed through, like they would show up there, right? The other thing is, what do we know? You know, a lot of people come to their abode. A lot of people, we're going to see in a second, important people. And we know when people are in compromising positions, you know, what happens sometimes is you say things, right? And so they also went there because they thought that maybe, right, they could learn something, you know, about what was going on in Jericho. Yes, Geraldine.
Well, naturally, they would go to somebody of low position. They're not going to go to somebody who has vested interests in, you know, the country. She's lowly in a certain regard. So I think that they would go to someone like that.
So it was kind of also like that was part of their kind of disguise, right? Was for some reason they thought that this would be a place where they can learn about the town. A little bit, so let's go back to the Midrashim. What do we learn about Rachav? Two things. One is, it's interesting that where does Rachav live? And this is going to become relevant. She lives on the wall, right? She is a person that she's neither in the city nor outside of the city, right? She's not somebody who's totally a part of the city, right? So that's something to think about. Something to think about also is the Midrash tells us that she was a prostitute from the age of 10. Okay, and that brings her, she was a prostitute, she was about 50 years old at this time, and she was engaged in prostitution the entire time that the Jewish people were traveling through the desert. Why is that relevant, right? To the point that we just made, because during that time, remember, she was a very beautiful woman. She probably was like a known woman, right? She was somebody that people knew. She was a famous innkeeper, you know, for whatever it was that her wares were, you know, whatever wares that she was selling, right? But a lot of people came through her doors, and because a lot of people came through the door, she knew a lot of things, and she also. The sages want us to understand that she knew a lot of things about the Jewish people, right? As the nations that surrounded them as they were traveling through the desert, you know, watched what was happening and then showed up at her inn, you know, and told her what was going on. So Rachav had a unique perspective on the Jewish people, an objective perspective based on her client, so to speak. And lastly, something to put in our pocket also is, what are the sages telling us? Why do the sages tell us that she was a harlot, from a zonah, from the time of the age of 10? What does that tell us about why she's in the business? Yes, Suzanne?
I would think she didn't start that herself. Her father, her parents decided they would traffic and benefit and be provided for because of her beauty. A 10-year-old doesn't go out and decide to sell her body. And that's really young, even in those days.
Awesome.
I mean, she wouldn't have even been in puberty at that time.
No,
10 years old is really young.
not awesome, like terrible, right? Terrible, but you're exactly on point. What the sages are telling us, right? They wanted us to understand Rachav's character. Yes, she's the zonah, right? But that's not in her essence, right? She, for some reason, right, beyond her, was placed in this position, right, in a manner that was out of her control, and she was stuck there. And, you know, when I was thinking about Rachav, it brought to mind the story of Les Mis. You know, everyone knows, you know, that story, and it's Fantine, right? The mom, you know, who in order to provide for her daughter, right, ends up as a whore, and all know that beautiful woman. I kept on thinking about, that's Rachav, right? This poor 10-year-old girl, right, who was sold into this job, right, and then was stuck there for all her life because that's what she knew and that's what she became. But is it really her in her essence, right? So that's something to think about. The other thing to think about is this, the practical notion of her profession as to why the spies showed up at her doorstep, and that has to do with the idea that she knew stuff, and she not only through her job, she also became perceptive as to human nature, and so when she spoke about, and we'll see when she speaks, the spies kind of understand that she has a true understanding of what's going on vis-a-vis the Jewish people. So we'll get there in a second. And now let's keep on with the story. So we have Rachav, right? We're at the story. The two spies are hiding in Rachav's roof, and Rachav has sent their messengers on the way, and now she goes up to speak to her visitors. And what does she say? So here we are. She says, she comes up to them and she says, I know that the Lord has given you the land. And I want you to listen to what she says to them. She doesn't say, first of all, I saved you, you saved me. First, she starts with a whole speech about the Jewish people's relationship to God. She says, I know that the Lord has given you the land, and that your terror has fallen upon us, and that all the inhabitants of the land melt away before you. For we have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea before you, right? We heard about what he did for you when he came out of Egypt, what you did, right, to the two kings of the Amorites just a couple months ago, right? There was a big military victory in which the Jewish people conquered and devastated the lands of two great powers of the desert, Sichon and Og. And she says that as soon as people heard the name of the Jewish people, right, they lose their spirit. Neither did there remain any more spirited any man because of you. Basically what she says, and the Midrash picks up on it, she goes, my clients lately, they haven't been so successful at doing what they want to do because they're so scared of the Jewish people who are standing on the edge of the Jordan ready to conquer. And she says, who is doing all this? The Lord, your God, right? So here, this harlot, what is she doing? She's saying, who is responsible? The Lord, your God. He is the God in heaven above and on earth beneath him. So what she does right here is she gives a speech in which she acknowledges her belief in a one and only God, right? Somehow this harlot, through her work, and the conversations that she overhears in her work, right? She has come to a recognition of God, right? And the unique relationship that he has with the Jewish people. Only after she says that, right? She says, now you are going to go back to Joshua, and now I need you to promise me one thing. I pray you swear to me, right, that since I have dealt kindly with you, that you will also deal kindly with my father's house, right? And give me and keep alive my father, my mother, my brothers, my sisters, right? And make sure that when you come and destroy the city, you save me. And I think it's really profound, right? Geraldine, I think, or Suzanne, was it you who said that she was sold into this probably because of her, her family situation. But here, what does she do? Is she still wants to save her people, right? And she demonstrates kindness. And we all know that kindness, chesed, is an operative word of the Jewish people. So when we meet somebody who has in them an inherent desire to do good, right? We start thinking, the bells start going off, and we're like, wow, okay, this is somebody that we wouldn't mind having in our fold. And we know that with Ruth, right? Ruth is the one with chesed. But anyway, back to the story. So here we have, she makes a speech about God, and then she says, save me, right? And what did the men say to her? Yes, right? They said, we will save you. If you don't disclose that we are here, right? We will save you. The only thing that you need to do is you need to hang out a red cord from the window when we come to attack the city of Jericho. And then if we see that red cord, then we will know that that you live there, and we will protect everyone that is in that house. And what is that red cord called? Right, the red cord is called a tikvat hashani. Remember, I told you to remember that word, right? So, what is the symbol of her salvation, or what is the tool of her salvation? It is her hanging out a tikva of shani, a red rope, right? But in almost in our parlance, it's almost like a rope of hope. And she says, "Great, I will do just that." And she sends them off on their way. And once again, we have to think about this idea is she's a Zonah, right? She makes a speech about the God of the Jewish people, and these two spies, they believe her, right? I don't know about, but a woman of ill repute, right, is not the first person that you would trust, right? But somehow there was something about Rachav that inspired trust in these two spies, so much so that they said, we're going to save you, like in the same way that you saved us. So let's take a second and let's just reflect. Okay, so we have the story of Rachav. What strikes you about the story of Rachav? What strikes you about her purpose here? Any ideas? Why is this story being told? Yes, Suzanne? And then Noreen? Yes.
I think it's telling us that people that are willing and able to see the truth of the one God and wanting to accept it and become part of it should be welcomed. And she shows that because she could have given them away, and then she would have been a hero amongst her own people, and they would have been prepared for Joshua and everybody else. So that's an important thing right there. But I wanted to also ask you the question of the red cord. Has that come down to today, to the little old ladies selling red strings at a hotel? And is that why they're red?
No, so I'm not so sure that it was really a red thread, or that's a midrash, but it's a great question. I wonder if there is some kind of symbolism. I'm a red thread kind of girl, because why not, But I'm gonna do some research on that, Suzanne, and check it out. Noreen, and then we'll go back to your point. Yes.
Well, number one, she was a harbinger of how the fact that God brought the people out of Egypt and he wanted his name to be known. So this tells you that God's name was known. And again, we see the world being saved by a woman, which I love. It was women that saved Moshe, and in the beginning of this thing. And now at the end, we have another woman who now goes into the next phase of it, which is really terrific.
And starts off the story. Like the women start off the story.
Right.
And she just starts off the story.
It introduces the struggles of the book of Joshua, that they're going to conquer the land and that this is going to happen. And you see it happening here. So
Great. So excellent. So basically what you're saying is somehow her actions, right, are setting us on a road. They're also giving us understanding of what people are thinking about this God and what this God can do. So Rachav, her speech, right, is introducing to us a kind of beautiful description of God that he would really like, you know. God is the one and only God of the Jewish people, and he does things for them. And how beautiful that a woman, right, is starting off Tanakh with that message, right, that we as people are supposed to carry with us, you know, all the time. Excellent. On the other hand, we have this, what Suzanne said, we have this woman, right, who represents the idea of we as the Jewish people wanting others to come into our fold, right, to join us in our beliefs. We don't proselytize, right, but somehow that's part of our mission. And how interesting, right, that the first story of Tanakh, right, kind of alludes to that mission, right, and alludes as well to Noreen's point. Anyone else have any other thoughts about what the story is doing here as a beginning to all the stories of Tanakh? So we'll keep on going.
Well,
but
you know, one other thing, Ariella, maybe it speaks to the military prowess of Joshua, because whereas Moshe sent out the 12 spies didn't do so good, here you see he's a little more strategic and sends out only 2 spies. So it kind of highlights his knowledge of how to conduct an operation here.
Excellent. I think there definitely is a point there as well, like speaking to Joshua's military prowess. Interestingly, like we see, number one, like he didn't send out the best spies though, right? And the other thing that's interesting to see is the idea that at the end of the day, right, the battle is really fought totally by God. It's really psychological warfare. So even though he sends out, right, these spies to kind of check out the mission, right, the battle is fought in a wholly other way. But I think there's also something important about introducing Rachav just before the battle is fought. And that's something I want to get to also isn't it interesting that we meet a individual, right, a human, right, before we destroy a city, you know, man, woman, and children. But first, before we get to that point, right, we meet a person, right, and we get to hear her speak and see a little bit about her essence. I think that's also something that we want to keep in our pocket. Just one little just fun fact is at the bottom. This woman right here her name is Shula Kishik Cohen, and she actually was kind of a Rachav for the Jewish people. She married at the age of 16, and she ended up in Lebanon in 1948 through 1961. And she infiltrated herself into the upper echelons of society. How she did that, right? There's a lot of hints, insinuations that she too was a zona, you know, just like that she had she had salons, right? But she also had other things. And she was able to find out a lot of information, which was used to actually save the Jews of Lebanon, and also to help the Mossad, you know, fight its enemies within Lebanon. In 1961, she was captured, and she was sentenced to death. Her sentence was commuted, and she wasn't executed, maybe because people didn't want her story to come out. So, and in 1967, she was exchanged after the 6-Day War. She was exchanged for prisoners of war at the time, and in fact, she just died two years ago. And she was heralded as the Grandma James Bond. And I just thought it was really interesting because, first of all, the Mossad has what is called honeypots. The Mossad does use Rachavs as kind of their spies to get information. But it's just interesting also to see how we have this, you know, modern day woman who kind of did what Rachav might have done, but yet we whitewash it, right? In the way that we were talking about before, that she was an innkeeper, right? But behind the doors, she was doing something much deeper. But that we don't want to focus on that. What we want to focus on is what she contributed to the Jewish people and what she did to save them. So just like a interesting little story, you can read up. And I think there's also a movie about her. Her name is Shula Kishik Cohen. And now let's start winding down the story and then trying to understand what the message of Rachav is. So the spies return to Joshua and they tell Joshua exactly what happened and how they were saved. And what is the conclusion of Yehoshua? The conclusion of Yehoshua from their conversation with Rachav is, truly the Lord has delivered into our hands all the land, and moreover, all the inhabitants of the land do melt away before us. Wow, right? All the spies tell them is, we were hidden by Rachav the Zonah in the walls of the city of Jericho. She told us, she gave us a little speech about monotheism and God's relationship with the Jewish people. We totally believe her. We totally want to save her. And Yehoshua says, thumbs up, I'm all in. We're going to take care of her. That's big, right? That means there's something really, really important about this story that we have to think about. Okay. Let's, what happens then? 4 chapters later, which is interesting. 4 chapters later is the Battle of Jericho. So again, we have to ask ourselves, why does this story appear right here in chapter 2? Why wasn't it chapter 5, right, to precede chapter 6? There's something about the story, right, that it gets prime placement, right, in the beginning of the book of Joshua and in the beginning of Tanakh. So what happens? We get to Jericho, and I love the story of Jericho. It's fun to read it in Tanakh. It's almost like reading like kind of a military children's book. There were like, it says there were 7 priests who carried 7 shofars, and they went around the city once a day for 6 days, and on the 7th day they went around 7 times, right? And on the 7th time they blew a shofar and the walls came tumbling down. It's so simple, right? No military prowess, total psychological warfare, miracle by God. And what happens in the midst of all this destruction? What do we have, right? Here we are, source 5, right? It came to pass when the people heard the sound, right? The horn, people shouted, the wall came tumbling down. Everything was utterly destroyed, right? All that was in the city, both man, woman, child, we could talk about that another time. But everything was destroyed, but who wasn't, right? Rachav, the woman of the wall, right? Joshua says to the 2 men that had spied out the land, go to the harlot's house. Like, then again, who was she known as, right? The Zonah. Go to the Zonah's house and bring her out. Like, you made a promise, go save her, right? And not only save her, right? Save her father, her mother, her brothers, her family, all her kindred. And they did that. And where did they set her? They set her outside the camp of Israel, right? They took Rachav and they put her outside the camp. But what happens in 2 psukim? Look carefully. But Rachav the harlot and her father's household and all that she had, did Joshua save alive? And where was she moved? And this is, I think, to I can't remember whose point, but I think Noreen, and she dwelt in the midst of Israel. Like, what did Joshua do? He said, no, right? Rachav doesn't belong on the outskirts of the city. Where does she belong? She belongs in our midst. We want her in our fold, right? How beautiful is that, right? So here's this woman, right, who goes from Zonah, right, to Isha, right, to woman. And not only is she an Isha, but the sages pick up on this idea that did Joshua save alive? What does it mean that he saved her alive? Like he saved her. Like what does it mean, Vatichya? It means that he married her, right? He gave her life, right? And so, so here we are at the end of the story. We have this idea that the sages want us to somehow merge, right? Joshua and Rachav, right? The leader of the Jewish people and the Zonah. So the question is, right, why? Right? Why do these two people have to marry? Right? What does the Zonah have to add to Joshua's persona as a leader? Right? So we're gonna answer that question in a second. I think it's time for a song. So we're gonna go. Let's do a song. I'm going to stop share and then come back. And here we go. Share my computer sound, optimize my video, and let's see what we got. We got here good old Paul Robeson.
With the battle of Jericho, 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 Joshua with the battle of Jericho, and the walls come a-tumbling down. Joshua with the battle of Jericho, 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 Joshua with the battle of Jericho, and the walls come a-tumbling down.
Good morning, brother pilgrim, pray tell me where you bound. Oh, tell me where you traveling to.
On the disenchanted ground.
My name it is, O pilgrim, to Canaan I am bound. Traveling through this wilderness.
On the disenchanted ground.
That morning.
Joshua with the battle of Jericho, Jericho, Jericho. Joshua with the battle of Jericho, and the walls come a-tumbling down.
That morning.
Joshua with the battle of Jericho, Jericho, Jericho. Joshua with the battle of Jericho, and the walls come a-tumbling down.
You may talk about King of Gideon, you may talk about the man of soul. There's none like good old Joshua.
At the battle of Jericho.
Up to the walls of Jericho, he marched with spear in hand. Go below them, ram on a Joshua cried.
How's the battle lamb in my hand?
Then the lamb began to sound. Joshua commanded to sound.
And the walls come a-tumbling down. Joshua with the battle of Jericho, Jericho, Jericho. Joshua with the battle of Jericho, and the walls come a-tumbling down. Joshua with the battle of Jericho.
There we go. We're back. Are you guys familiar with that song? It was like when I was started preparing this, I'm like, I know there's a song. I know there's a song. So I wanted. So this is an old. It's a gospel actually from predates the Civil War. So I want to also it just a lot of times music. If you look how people take stories, right, and put it to their own use, right, you can get a sense of what the stories are really all about. So I want to go into our wrap up portion of what is the message of Rachav with this idea of and the walls come tumbling down. Remember, because where does Rachav live, right? Rachav is a person who lives in the wall, right? Neither in, neither outside, like neither part, right? Of neither part of the city, but not outside the city. She's somebody who's living in between two worlds, and her wall comes tumbling down. So we're gonna come back to this image at the end of class. So now let's start thinking about, so who is Rachav? So we've tried to establish that there's something more than just a story going on here, because Tanakh just doesn't tell stories, right? Stories are told to guide us, right? To give us a lens through which to see the world. So what is Rachav here to teach us? So the first thing I want to address is something that you touched upon, Noreen, the idea of the importance to Yoshua as a military man of learning about Rachav. So, and the importance of Yoshua actually marrying Rachav, right? So we're about to conquer the land, right? God has given us a charge to dispossess, right, the 7 nations of that live in the land of Israel. And he says to us, and you're going to do it, right? And so it's very possible that what's going to happen is we are going to get so revved up, right, in the passion of that cause, right, that we're going to forget maybe a little bit of our humanity, which goes back all the way to the story of Dinah and our discussion of Sahal's often discussed concept of the purity of arms. That we as the Jewish people, we may engage in military maneuvers, right? We may have to fight battles, right? But at the end of the day, we have to remember, we have to be married to the idea that we are fighting people, right? And we have to move into those battles with the remembrance of the people that we are fighting, and use that to temper what it is that how it is that we fight. The other thing is important is that those battles also are going to lead to our establishment of a state, of a nation. And so what's important also is that when we establish that nation, we remember the Rachavs. And that's a mantra that exists throughout the book of Deuteronomy, is that when you are affluent and you are successful in your land, remember always that there are people who live on the wall, right? There are people that are forced at the age of 10, right, to do things that they don't want to do. Don't forget those people, right? So why is the story of Rachav here? Because it sets the stage to our military conquest, right? It reminds us of the fact that we are people battling people. And then it reminds us that once those battles are over, right, we have to think about the kind of society that we want to establish. And that society of being just and a care and kind to the other is a mantra that also exists throughout, right, the Tanakh. And unfortunately, throughout Tanakh, what are our imperfections, as Rose would say? What are our imperfections? Not only that we become idol worshipers, but also we forget the other. We forget the Rachavs in our life. So maybe Rachav exists there, right, as a reminder of who it is that we must remember. And interestingly, who talks a lot about the idea that we mess up by forgetting the other? It's none other than the prophet Jeremiah. Jeremiah talks a lot about the idea that we forget about the idea that we have to be not only believers, but do-gooders. So that's Rachav message number 1. Okay. Now let's go to Rachav message number 2. And this is also something that was alluded to in our discussions, right? We were talking about the idea that Rachav represents those people, right, who come to a recognition of God and independently, right? And they don't necessarily want to become a part of our fold, but they want to be believers, right? We're not people who try to make Jews, right, into the world. We are people who try to make the world into believers in one God. And so why is Rachav here? In a way, Rachav is here because it sets the tone for what our mission is vis-a-vis the rest of the world. And that's one of the things that Tanakh discusses over and tries to establish for us, is it establishes for us how it is that we are supposed to become a light onto other nations, right? How it is that we are supposed to act, and what it is that we want to cause the nations of the world to believe, and exactly what it is that we want the nations of the world to believe is exactly contained in Rachav's speech, right? We want the nations of the world to understand, right, that there is a God in this world, right? And this God is a part of this world, and we are and must answer to this God, right? And so we have the story of Rachav as there to teach us what our mission is, and often also to remind us that we have to care about what the people of the world have to say about us. And that's sometimes something that it's on one hand, and throughout history, right? During exile, we cared what people had to say about us because we were scared about what we were scared that if we said the wrong thing, if we acted in the wrong way, that something would happen to us. But now, in this day and age, what Rachav teaches us is that we have to care about what other people say in the world, not because we're vulnerable, but because we have a responsibility, right, to spread our message through our actions to the rest of the world. That was a lot. Let's look at it in the text.
Could I say something?
Sure, Geraldine.
You know, I also want to look at this as the fact that Rachav was a traitor to her own people.
Interesting, right?
And so what is that message?
Excellent.
And she was okay with saving her own family, but forget everybody else. And so I have a problem with this story.
Excellent. So you know what? So I think you might like the third interpretation of Rachav. We're going to get there in a second. I just want to quickly show you the text because it brings back the midrashim that we were learning at the beginning. Remember we said that, let me get rid of 1 second. Let me get this. 1 second. I just have to, how do I?
Jericho, just with the battle of Jericho.
Back to the stories of Rachav. So, remember we talked about that Rachav was that she was the ancestress of Jeremiah. So one of the things that Jeremiah says is that what is the purpose of the Jewish people, right? Is to bring about other believers, right? And he says that the other nations of the world one day will come from the ends of the earth and say our fathers inherited other delusions, things that are futile and worthless, right? They're going to throw away their wrong beliefs, and they are going to adopt the beliefs of the Jewish people. And on this page, I'm going to move on, but on this page are midrashim that equate Rachav with other famous converts, namely Yitro and Naaman. And so she represents the nations of the world who look at Israel, right? And they see in Israel, they find in Israel's trajectory of Israel's history, the hand of God, and it leads them to believe in God. The other thing that just is important, she also is, and that we always have to remember, and that sometimes, unfortunately, when we are in a place, like when we are in a comfortable place, we forget that the Jewish people, we may be the chosen people, but that doesn't mean that we are above the other nations. It means that we are chosen with a responsibility, and that each of the nations in the world, and this is a lesson that Rabbi Sachs talks about a lot, that each of the nations of the world has a role in this world that it needs to fulfill. And so you have people like Rachav who exist in the world to advocate, to ensure, this goes against your point, right? But because she doesn't seem to be advocating for her nation, but she is used by the Midrash as somebody who when God wants to do something to one of the nations of the world, he knocks on Rachav's door and he says, Rachav, what do you think? So, but I know, Geraldine, you're not going to like that answer because it doesn't seem like that goes with Rachav's character. But I just want to put that out there. So we have the idea of why is Rachav here? One is to teach us the importance of paying attention to humanity, whatever it is that we're engaged in, whether it is militarily or building a society. It is, Rachav is here to teach us the importance of, at the outset of Tanakh, to explain to us what our ultimate mission is to transform the world into a world of God is the King of all kings, okay? But there's a third understanding of Rachav, and that goes to both Rose's point and Geraldine's point. Who is Rachav, right? What is Rachav's profession, right? She's a harlot, right? She's a zona, right? She's a person who doesn't have loyalty, right? She is a person who, not one to be trusted, right? She's not a stellar profession to be in, right? But yet, for some reason, right, she marries Joshua, right? She is put in the same bed, literally, right, with Yoshua. So what's going on there? So let's explore this idea of why the imagery of a zonah, of a harlot, is used, right, to begin the stories of Tanakh. So there's a famous book in scriptures called Hosea. And Hosea was a prophet who lived around 720, and just before the exile of the 10 tribes. And by the time Hosea exists, the Jewish people are really messed up. They are like sleeping with all the wrong gods. And God is really upset at the Jewish people, and he wants to punish them. And so he comes to Hosea and he says, Hosea, I'm really upset at the Jewish people, but and I'm about to mess with them. And what does Hosea do? Hosea says, go for it, God. He says, they're not doing good. Go punish them. And God is not happy with that response, because what is the job of a prophet, right? The job of a prophet is to advocate for the Jewish people, right? I mean, God wants, right, the prophets to stand up to him. And so he says, you know what I want you to do? And that's we're not going to look at inside right now, but he says, Hosea, go and marry a zonah. Okay, go marry a zonah, and I'll tell you what to do next. So in fact, Hosea goes and he marries a zonah, and he ends up having 3 children with her, right? And who are those 3 children? I'm just going to go back because the names are great. Their names are Yisrael, because God is about to mess with the people who lived in like the Jezreel, that section of Israel. The second one's name is Lu Ruchama. No compassion, right? Interesting, right? God is about to act in a way that he's not going to have compassion on the Jewish people. And then the third name of the kid is Lu Ami, right? Not my nation. Whoa, okay? So strange, right? What's going on here? So Hosea is then told, after he has 3 kids with this zonah, who's been playing around during the course of their marriage, God says, go, get rid of her, go divorce her. And Hosea goes, wait, but she's my wife, right? And even though she's playing around, right, I have a relationship with her. I love her, right? So what's the message of Hosea? Like, what's God doing, right? God is saying, anyone want to tell me what's God doing with this little scenario, this little story, big story, right? What message is he giving to Hosea? You can look in there. What's the message? Who is the zonah and who is Hosea in this story, right? Hosea, right? Hosea is like the prophet of God, right? And who is the Zonah? The Jewish people, right? And what is Hashem giving a message to to Hosea? He says, you know what? They are an imperfect people, right? They are a people that have made a lot of mistakes and they stray from me. But at the end of the day, they are my people, right? They with all their fallacies, right? With all their foibles, and all of their looking, right, in other pastures, right? They still are mine. And at the end of the day, what do I know? I know that they are going to return to me. And that's what, and that's how the little story of Hosea ends. He says, she shall run after lovers, right? But she shall not overtake them. And she shall seek them, but shall not find them. And then what will she say? I will go and return to my first husband, right? For then it was better with me than now. So, what, right? So what does Hashem say to Hosea? At the end of the day, she's going to come back, right? So Geraldine, why does Yoshua, right, marry the Zonah, right? At the beginning of the story of Tanakh. And the Zonah, you're right, is not perfect, right? She maybe sold out her own family, right? But at the end of the day, there's something in her, that is good. Maybe she sold out her people because they weren't good. Maybe they did really, really bad things. And so she wanted to move away from them, right? So unfortunately, there are bad people, right, in this world. So potentially, she was an adulteress to her people because she understood, that it was not a place that she was supposed to be, right? She was a woman who lived in the wall, right? She lived in the wall. So to go back to our point, right? Why does the story of Tanakh begin with the story of a harlot, right? A Zonah who comes to believe in God, because isn't that the story of the Jewish people, right? Throughout Tanakh, right? Aren't we the Zonah, right? Who ultimately, at the end of days, at the end of time, will come back, right, to our first husband. And that is going to be the story of shiur that we're going to talk about in 2 weeks, right? That there is a love affair that exists between God and the Jewish people. It's sultry, it's intense, and it's volatile. It's not a straight line. And that's why Yehoshua, right? Hosea has to marry the Zonah, right? That's why the sages put us together, because what exists, right, from the very beginning of the stories in Tanakh is a marriage between the good, right, between Hosea and a little bit of a difficult wife, right? So to bring it all together, let's bring it all home. So why is the story of Rachav here in the very beginning of Yehoshua? It's not because it's a great story of good spy, great James Bond, right? Spy does well and all ends well. It's because there's something very significant about the heroine Rachav that we have to think about as we begin to study Tanakh. And it is through her eyes, right? Through the eyes of this woman, Rachav, right? That we want to look at all of Tanakh, and the messages that Tanakh is giving us are colored by what Rachav represents. Number one, she represents the importance of always recognizing, right, the other, right? Always find those people on the wall and always act in a way which bespeaks compassion, even when we are on a holy mission, right? Don't forget, right? Don't forget the humanity within us. That's number one. Number two, right? Rachav serves as, she actually represents, right, the nations of the world and our responsibility to as a people to speak to the nations of the world and interact with them in a way that elevates the entire world, right? That is our mission, not to proselytize, but to somehow bring the world together. And if you remember, the last prophet that is a descendant of Rachav, what is his name? Nothing other than Shalom, right? Shalom, peace, completion, right? So that is the job of the Jewish people that is spoken about in Tanakh, is this idea of of working together with the nations of the world to create a complete world, an elevated world in which we all believe in a God that we answer to and a God that is above us. So that's message number 2. And what's message number 3? Okay, message number 3 is what Geraldine was talking about and what Rose was talking about, is this idea that we as a Jewish people, right, unfortunately, we are, throughout our history, have been zonot, right? We have been, right, we have looked in other places, but yet at the end of the day, right, God wants to stay married to us. Crazy, but true, right? So what we need to do now, though, is we have to go back to our original midrashim and try to understand what the message of those midrashim are. So if we remember, there were 2 things that we wanted to think about. One is the idea that that Rachav was the ancestress, that's the right word, right, of 8 prophets. So beginning with Jeremiah. So there must be something, right, about those prophets, right, that ties them all together and ties them to Rachav. That's number 1. And number 2, we said, remember that word. Remember the word tikvah. The idea that what saved Rachav was a rope, red or not, right, that had a name that is used to mean hope. Interestingly, if you go to the prophets, the first prophet to use the word hope is none other than Jeremiah. Jeremiah talks about Jeremiah, we think of Jeremiah as being the prophet of doomsday, of doom, but really he is the prophet of rebuilding and reparation. And he beautifully says, just as the Jewish people are about to go into exile, famously says, our matriarch Rachel, she is crying in the heavens because the children of Israel are going into exile. And what does God respond to her? He says, Mini kolech mi bechi ve'inayich mi dima, right? Remove the tears from your eyes and stop your voice from crying, right? Why? Yesh tikva la'achritech, because there is hope. V'shavu banim l'gvula. So Jeremiah, the ancestress, the descendant of Rachav, hands over to the Jewish people, right, the cord of hope, right? That even after destruction, even after you have been the zonah, right, God wants to marry you and bring you back. And beautifully, there's a story in the book of Jeremiah in which Jeremiah, he's literally in the prisons. He's imprisoned by the Jewish people because they don't like what he's been saying about the destruction of the temple, and he's in dire straits. And God goes and he says, Jeremiah, what I want you to do is I want you to purchase land in Israel. And Jeremiah's like, purchase land in Israel? That's crazy, right? The Jewish people are about to be exiled and the country's going to be ransacked. So God said, nope, that's exactly what I want you to do. And I want you to call this guy named Hanamel, who's your cousin, and I want you to write the deed, and he's going to take the deed and he's going to put it into a bottle and he's going to put it in a place, and you're going to give it to this guy named Baruch ben Neriah, and Baruch ben Neriah is going to hold on to it. And when the Jews are in exile, he's going to hold on to this bottle And this bottle is going to symbolize the idea that the Jewish people are going to return. And guess what? In this story of hope for a future, right, who is mentioned? None other than 7 of the prophets that were named as the descendants of Rachav. I'll just show you really quickly so you can see. I'm not joking, but here we go. Here we are. Well, that's we've got Yirmiyahu, Baruch, Neriah, Machzeh, Hanamel. So 5 of them. And all of them, right? What do all of them hold on to? All of them are holding on to the tikvah, right? The hope of the Jewish future. And finally, remember we met a woman prophet, woman prophet, Huldah. And who was Huldah the granddaughter of? None other than someone by the name of Tikvah, hope. So now, how beautiful, right? Who is Rachav? Rachav is a symbol of the ability of an individual to repair and rebuild, right? And what is the symbol of Rachav's reparation and rebirth, so to speak, is that red ribbon, right? That she hangs out of her window, representing the idea that she wants to get back to her first husband, right? She wants to get back to Hosea, to Yoshua, and get back to God. And the sages, in telling us that Rachav is a descendant, an ancestor of all these prophets, right? What are the sages doing? They're saying jump forward through history. You think, right? You think that God is going to give you up, because you have gone different places. What God carries with him throughout history, and what the Jewish people carry with them, is the cord of tikvah. And so that is why we begin the story of Tanakh with the story of Rachav, because the story of Tanakh is about the relationship, as you said, between God and the Jewish people that is eternal and tied up with this red ribbon of hope. So